Hello, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about the first exam and some things you can do to prepare for it. Before getting into the exam, I wanted to remind you about the tutoring options. Attending tutoring, I think, will be a great thing to do to get ready for the exam, and you can get some extra credit for doing so. For every 2 hours of tutoring you have this semester, you can excuse one of the discussion board grades. I think participating in tutoring or participating in the discussion boards are both equally valid in terms of showing that you are engaged with the class and doing your best to learn. And ideally, you can sort of max out on that participation part of your grade. And if this is going to help you to do that, then I definitely encourage doing so. So let's go ahead and talk about the exam. And I want to talk about some logistics to start with. And first of all, some of the items that will be important as you take the exam. You will be provided with a periodic table. Um, it's not something you need to memorize. You'll always have access to it. You just will need to know how to interpret it, and that could be done in a variety of ways based on the material that we've covered so far in the semester. You will need to bring a pencil and a calculator. Very important that you have a calculator. The exam is written assuming that you have access to that. Um, you will not have time to do long division on the side of the paper. So make sure you have a calculator to help you with that. And one note on that, and I do mention this a bit later here, the calculator should not be your cell phone. Okay, it should be a separate calculator. So make sure you have one. There are some that you can check out from the library, so that is an option you will have. But in some way, make sure you're able to have a calculator. And also, I would say it should be one you're familiar with, right? So you don't want to show up to the exam with a calculator that you don't know how to use. So make sure you're spending some time ahead of time familiarizing yourself with whatever calculator you are going to use. You may have a note card on this test. We'll talk about that a little bit more on one of the later slides. And then in terms of your cell phone, obviously, if you have some emergency you need to be aware of, that's fine, but I shouldn't see the cell phone during the exam. It should be put away. It should not be used as a resource, as a calculator, as any kind of a reference. So if you have an emergency and you need to step outside to take a phone call, that is fine. However, it shouldn't be something that I see you using while you're taking the exam. Also related to the logistics, I want to talk a little bit about the timing involved for this exam. So we have basically about a 3-hour block of time for the lab. The first 90 minutes of that time will be set aside for completion of the exam. So the exam should be something that you can get done during a 90-minute period of time. So just kind of when you get the exam, be aware that that's how long you will have. And then once you're done with the exam, the rest of that class time will be for completing the separation of a mixtures lab that we had begun prior to this lab period. Couple of notes on that. It's possible some of you might get done in one day. Usually it does take 2 days for most people. So if you are someone that is completely done with that lab, you are free to go once you're done with the exam. And then the second thing is that we're not going to start on the lab activity while other people are taking the exam. Okay, so that would be kind of rude in terms of people trying to concentrate, and there's all this noise in the background of people working on something else. So if you get done early, feel free to take a break, go do whatever you need, and then come back. Um, around basically the 90-minute mark to then go ahead and complete that lab. Okay, let's talk about this note card. You may have a note card on the first exam. It can be a 3-inch by 5-inch note card, so I have included the units there. You can write on both sides is fine. You can, if you want to print something out on a printer and then tape it on, that's fine. So if you want some reference on there, one of the things I would recommend is that anything you think you might need to know related to nomenclature be on there. So for example, if you don't have all of the polyatomic ions memorized yet, that would be something to maybe put on your note card. But anything on one note card is fine. You will not necessarily have this option for later exams. So part of this is on the first exam. There's a lot of information right away. Some of it is sort of memorization, and I don't want that to be the focus of your preparation. I want to make sure you are preparing by making sure you can apply the concepts. So if you feel like you need to memorize something, I would rather you write it down on a note card than try to focus on that at the expense of the actual concepts. Another thing I'll mention here, the process of making the note card itself is very helpful to your learning, and that it's a way to help organize your thoughts. So it's possible there'll be some amount of note cards on exams later in the semester, probably not every exam, but it's something that I wanted to give for you as an option, at least on this first exam. For this exam, we have basically 3 modules, Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. They're fairly evenly distributed in terms of the content. Chapter 1 is probably the least focused in terms of the exam content, but you do need to know basically all 3 of those chapters, and it's evenly distributed throughout them. One other thing I will mention in terms of preparing, there is a lot of material in these chapters, and it might not always be obvious which material is important to memorize. I shouldn't say memorize. Important to know versus sort of random facts that you might happen to memorize along the way. And so the way I try to point you in the right direction here is the worksheets and quizzes. The worksheets and quizzes are what you want to make sure you know how to do. So I would say 95% of the exam is going to strongly resemble something you have seen before. Now that doesn't mean it is the exact same question, but it will be over a similar concept, probably asked in a similar way. So you won't have the same numbers, you won't have the same chemical equations, or the same formulas in every case, but it will be a similar layout, similar process to what you've seen on the worksheets. And things that didn't show up there are less likely to be on the exam. Also, the homework is sort of a guide as well. The caution I would put on there is that some of the homework questions will be more challenging than what you will see on the exam, and that's great in terms of preparing for it. But if you take that as this is the bar I need to clear, it's probably not quite as high as some of the more challenging homework questions. So that's 95% of the exam. So there's about 5% that could be something that came up in the textbook or the videos that was not emphasized on the worksheets or quizzes. So if all you do is, so if you haven't watched any of the videos, if you haven't mastered everything in the textbook, and all you've done is you've done all of the worksheets, and you feel confident about those, and you've done well on the quizzes, then you're probably going to do fairly well on the exam overall, and there'll just be a small amount of the content that is in addition to the other stuff. What I would recommend for you in terms of getting ready for this exam is, if you haven't done all of the worksheets, do any worksheets you haven't done yet. So complete all of those worksheets. Complete the homework assignments, particularly if you would like to improve your quiz scores. So if you got a 10 on a quiz, the homework isn't going to improve your grade for that module, but you might want to do it for one of the other modules where maybe your grade wasn't as high, or you might want to do it if you still feel like you could use some work and you just happen to get lucky on that quiz. So I would recommend doing the homework. That is due at the start of the exam, so show up for the exam with your homework ready to turn in if that is something that you would like to do. I would recommend also preparing a note card, and put anything on your note card that you want to have access to while taking the exam. Exception, of course, is the periodic table. You will have a periodic table. Don't try to fit it on your note card. So that will be available to you. But anything else, whether it's polyatomic ions, kind of any guides you need in terms of how the mole concept works, what is Avogadro's number, anything like that, put it on the note card. And then the final thing, this is actually the most important thing to do well, is that your mind is in a good spot. So make sure you get a good night's sleep the night before the exam. If it's the only night of the week you get a good night's sleep, make sure you leave space to be well rested before the exam. Eat breakfast. Again, if it's the only day of the week you eat breakfast the day of the exam. Again, you want your mind to be in the best spot so you can do great on the exam. So that is my my guides for this first exam. I hope you all do well. Please leave anything on the discussion board if you have any questions.